Hi there, folks! Welcome back. It's been an absolutely brutal week. The sun is revolting. It's been 100 degrees out there today, so I came back home after I was done at the office. I crashed on the couch. I woke up and I'm like, hey, you know what? Let me throw a YouTube video together. So this is an idea that I've had for a while. This is going to be a long one, so if you want to give this a podcast treatment and just listen to it, there's not going to be a whole lot going on screen. So if you just want to tune in while you're doing something else, this is going to be one of those type of videos. So as for this video that I'll be doing today, I wanted to go off my top 10 movie characters of all time. Now, this is definitely not a list of the greatest performances of all time, because you see those lists everywhere, and they're always the same, they're really boring. This is absolutely subjective. So some rules here. Firstly, I gotta be happy to see these characters on screen. I mean, it just kind of comes with the territory. Every time any of these characters appear in their respective movies, I'm always gonna be like, wait, where are they? Are they here yet? You know, like, I gotta be thrilled that they're coming up. Like, these guys are really important to me, so that's why I really wanted to talk about them here. Another rule here is only one character per franchise, and one specific performance for each character if multiple actors portrayed that particular character in question. You know, like, especially if we're going into comics and stuff like that. So that's something worth mentioning. Like, for example, if I were to say Batman, who, spoiler, is not on this list, which is bizarre, but I have good reason for that, we'll get into it, I'd be choosing what specific portrayal of Batman I'd want to be here. Another thing is, this is more about the character themselves, and not necessarily the movie that they're in. Some of the characters here, not only are some of them in pretty obscure movies, but some of them are also in movies that aren't necessarily regarded as perfect, and some people even just think these movies are flat out awful. But me personally, for my money, the way that these characters are done, that's what keeps me going back. There's actually one movie here, the only reason why I watch a movie at all is for that specific character, so, but I'm not going to say who it is just yet. And I kind of implied this already. Public consensus is insignificant. I do not care what other people say are the greatest characters, most well acted. We already know who those people are, and it would be boring if I was just rattling them off like a guy who doesn't have a film degree or anything like that. Just as a guy who absolutely loves movies, I just want to talk about my favorite characters, why I think they're great, and if you haven't seen those movies, why you should probably go ahead and see them yourself. And that being said, that brings me to my last real caveat here. Spoilers for all characters on this list and their respective franchises. So if I start talking about a character and you're like, oh crap, I haven't seen that movie yet, I really wanted to see it, then you could skip over that, hop to the next entry, you know what I mean? But the thing is, it's impossible to talk about your favorite movie characters in life ever without talking about some really significant plot beats. So some of them are going to be more spoilery than others. Others, it's going to be pretty straight cut, like, especially if you already know those characters really well, just universally. But for the other ones that are a little bit more specific and niche, I will go into them a little bit more in depth. So before we start, let me just do some honorable mentions first. I kind of already mentioned this guy, Batman, specifically Batman from 1989, as portrayed by Michael Keaton. Technically, you could also loop in Batman Returns, as well as The Flash, which came out just a few years ago. I couldn't, in good conscience, put any Batman on this list, simply because Batman is such a difficult character, in that everybody has a different perception of what he's supposed to be. Michael Keaton, for me, he's as close as you can get. I just wish that he was in better movies, or his story could have been explored a little more. In the very first Batman movie, he's kind of just like that shady character in Gotham. It's a really good introduction to this version of Batman. In Batman Returns, we get to know him a little bit more, especially with him and Catwoman and the Penguin, and just finding himself in this group of weirdos and trying to figure out where he places himself amongst them. And then in The Flash, for the 7 people who have watched it, not my favorite movie ever, but what they do with Batman there, I actually think is really good. It's the exact same Batman, it's canon to that story, except he's a lot later on in life, Gotham's safe now, but now he's kind of just this hero who no longer has purpose because he's done his job. So, but that being said, there's such a massive gap between Returns and Flash, and I don't even know if most folks would consider Flash canon to the first Burton movies that we had before. So it just feels odd for me to put Batman on this list. That brings us to two other honorable mentions. These are two groups of characters where there's not necessarily an individual one that stands out, at least for me. I think all of them bring something fun to the table, but there isn't really a particular one that totally blows my socks off, but I do love seeing them all regardless, so I'm going to say them in a single breath. We have all of the Gremlins from the Gremlins duology, including Gremlins and Gremlins 2 the New Batch, and the original gang of puppets from the Puppet Master franchise. And for those of you who know that timeline at all, the original Puppet Master, all the way up to and including Retro Puppet Master. The ones after that, I don't give a hell. Honestly, I don't. So the Gremlins and the puppets, the thing about them is they're more gimmicky as opposed to transcendent or making you go, oh, that character taught me a lot about life, or that they taught me a lot about storytelling. Not necessarily. I just really love both of these groups a lot. They're really fun. I enjoy all these movies thoroughly. Again, excluding the Puppet Master movies that came after Retro Puppet Master. I even enjoy Retro. I know a lot of people don't. But yeah, so Gremlins, of course, that is one of those weird franchises that's really hard to place genre-wise. It's some comedy, it's some horror, it's a little bit of a family movie too. And then the second movie, it's notoriously insane, and I've said it before, it's my favorite sequel of all time. I know it's a controversial opinion, but it's a sequel that is absolutely reviled with the very concept of sequels, and it shows. But in doing that, it gives us some of the most insane and fun Gremlins we've ever seen. So they're really fantastic. And if I had to choose one, I really like Mogwai Mohawk specifically. When I say Gremlins, it's including the Gremlins and the Mogwai. But I really love the look of Mogwai Mohawk up there. And then Gizmo is great too, and Stripe. Those are probably my three. Oh, and Brain. Greta's cool too. There's a lot of them. Again, it's really hard to choose just one for this list. And then as for Puppet Master, for those of you who don't know what this franchise is, because this is, again, one of those really niche franchises we're talking about, it's a little horror series, I think sprang up in the mid-'80s, and it's still going today. It's produced by a studio called Full Moon Productions. Very, very low budget, straight-to-video fare. None of the movies are necessarily Oscar-worthy, but at least most of them are very enjoyable, just schlocky fun, and the best part of them is, of course, the puppets. You have Blade, you have Torch, who's probably my favorite, you have the absolutely ghastly Leech Woman, for those of you who don't know, literally a little woman that spits leeches from her mouth to eat people. It's as vile as you're thinking it is. But yeah, everyone's got their favorite puppet, and that's one of the most enjoyable things about this franchise. And it's also a little weird because the puppets don't remain as a consistent package throughout these movies. Like, for example, Torch is my favorite. He's not even in the first movie. I don't even think he's in the third. I think he's only in 2 movies in this entire franchise. But, like, the poster boy for this franchise is Blade. So if you force me to choose one objectively, it would probably be Blade, but my personal favorite's Torch, and he's barely in these movies at all. So, again, it's kind of just one of those gray areas. Now, moving on from these 2 group categories, 2 more honorable mentions. Sorry, I lied, 3 more. But I'll go through these quick. First, 2 from TV. Naturally, they're on movies, so I can't really put them on this list. We have, I guess, the most human character of all the characters here, the most street level. We have Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother. I think of all characters I've seen in TV, he has been the most relatable. He's my favorite TV character of all time. This is a show that I started watching when I really needed it. I think all people can highlight those times when they were down to the dumps. I stumbled upon a movie franchise or a TV show that kind of helped to pull them out of it a little bit. After I've gone through this whole story in other videos, you could find them easy, where I've kind of talked about that really heavy depression I hit after I graduated from college, and then started my first full-time job right after that. Again, college was awesome, the job was also awesome, and continues to be awesome, but I was just finding myself in a really strange, early life crisis right there. And this show really helped to ground me, and I really saw myself in Ted Mosby, this guy who's just trying to figure out how life functions, what it means to find the love of your life, and what that takes. Should it be something that you should rush after? What are the consequences of that? And also, what are the consequences of just being slow and taking your time? And Also, the rapport he has with all his friends, of course, Barney and Robin especially. So, yeah, it's easily my favorite TV show of all time. And I'd also like to throw totally different TV show here, but we have Negan from The Walking Dead. I think he is an absolutely fascinating character. To a point. This is a franchise where, if anyone's familiar with Walking Dead, you know that everyone's got a certain point in the show where they kind of just stop, you know? For me, the show stops when Negan is redeemed. The thing that makes Negan so interesting to me is that at this point in the show, being, I think, season 5, season 6, around that area, you know, you have a group of survivors, and even if you don't know the show, you get the general principle. They're surviving zombies, or surviving humans who cause a lot of problems, stuff like that. And then they get through a whole lot of big challenges, they lose a lot of friends along the way, but ultimately, your core characters are still there up to that point. But then everything grinds to a halt, where all your heroes, the characters that you've fallen in love with, are lined up in this vacant lot. There's a trailer, and then out from that trailer is just a dude with a bat. And you're like, oh, how bad can this guy be? And within a breath, he eliminates 2 fan-favorite characters right in front of you. One obviously being a lot more popular than the other, but this is an area where you don't have to get into spoilers here. But Negan is fascinating not only because his performance is absolutely amazing, and the characterization is top-notch, but just the fact that he takes so many seasons of storytelling and says, just within a scene, you don't know shit. There are going to be dire consequences. All these characters that you love and adore, none of them are safe. Don't you forget that. And I love that this show is able to do that. And eventually, again, some people prefer this, some people don't. That's why some people just draw the line here. Though some people like to take it further. With the Negan character, you actually start to learn about his backstory, learn about where he came from, and somehow he becomes sympathetic. Perhaps not redeemable, but you understand where he came from, at least. And does that mean you can forgive him? That's kind of the question, and that's really interesting to dive into as well. That's why, for me, the show kind of ends when Negan eventually does achieve that redemption and we learn about his backstory. He's still an active character. He's still in one of the spin-off shows with Maggie. I don't even remember what it's called. Dead City, was it? I don't remember. I don't follow all the extra shows at this point, but I finished the main one. That's all that really matters to me. But yeah, Negan, excellent character, as is Ted Mosby. Don't want to leave him behind there. And then one last character, I inherently can't include him on this list because he's not a movie character, he's a video game character, but he is part of one of the franchises of the same character who's also on this list. That is Darth Revan from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which is technically a trilogy, being that you had KOTOR, as it's called, the acronym, the first one, the second one, and then the multiplayer game that came later, simply just called Star Wars Old Republic. I won't go too much into him here, because I've talked to him before, I think on my Player Display channel, but he's basically Darth Vader on steroids. His story, it's literally like 300 years long, so I'm not even going to start, but he's one of the few characters, I think the only character, who is able to tread the line between the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force in perfect harmony. Of course, there's a certain point where he falls off, and his life falls apart because of that, but I just find him so philosophically enticing because this is a character who's able to draw from the greatest aspects of humanity and its worst sides, and is able to find a common ground to create a foundation that is arguably stronger than what the Jedi and the Sith could have ever put forward. So I think he is an absolutely amazing character. I got his helmet right there, which I've custom painted and everything. I went through that whole effort. So, yeah, Darth Revan, he's one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, but for the sake of limiting this list, I'm just going to keep it down to the movies. So, all that being said, I'm going to take a quick pause, and we will get into the top 10. So, one moment. Alright, let's get into the goddamn list. Some I'm going to have a lot more to say than others. Others are going to be pretty quick in one note. But let's do it. So, firstly, in my 10th spot, this one I'm still kind of gray on. In fact, this whole list could be subject to change in the next month, let alone week. But for number 10, I'm going to say the Scar Predator from Alien vs. Predator, the first of those two movies, the second being absolutely awful, and honestly the first one not being too particularly great. It boils down to this: I really love the idea of the Predator from the original 1980s movie. I remember I was at an eye party with my dad when I was a little kid, and I saw a mask of the Berserker Predator. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, every single Predator has their own name, which is pretty cool. And my dad was like, "Hey, you've never seen Predator? Let's go home and I should show you that at some point." And we watched the original Predator movie, and from that point forward, I was totally hooked. I knew absolutely nothing about the franchise. Went into the first movie totally dry, and it took me a little while to watch the rest of them. I think I watched them all out of order, but eventually I tackled all of them, including the recently done Prey and Killer of Killers. So I'm fully up to date as far as movies and I guess TV now with Killer of Killers is concerned. And the Predators are kind of tough because as much as I absolutely love the idea of Predators, I wouldn't say that the Predator movies are my favorite. Same can be said about the original Predator. Same can be said about the first Alien vs. Predator. They're both good. They both serve their roles well. They're not necessarily, though, the type of Predator movie that I want to have. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with either of those two. The thing about the Predator is the mystique, the culture, their psychology, the way they operate. That's what I want to see from a Predator movie. I'm really bored. I mean, you can excuse it for the first two movies, maybe, where you have a Predator hunting people down, like slasher style, hiding in the shadows, or with freaking invisibility and their technology, picking people off one by one. There's one guy or girl at this point who outsmarts them, and then they beep beep boop and then blow themselves up. Like, I think it's such a cop-out. I'm so sick of that. So a lot of these Predators, they look cool, they walk cool, they move cool, they kill cool, but they don't bring a whole lot story-wise. They don't bring a whole lot of complexity. So that being said, if I'm to cherry pick who is my favorite Predator in all of these movies, and perhaps the lore, besides including comics and video games too, which again, we're not talking about here, and I can't even speak to in its entirety, I'd have to choose Scar Predator from Alien vs. Predator. The premise of this movie, again, if you're really interested in seeing this movie, let's get past this entry and hop to the next one. The premise is you have a whole bunch of archaeologists. They go to Antarctica. Sorry, it's late right now, so my grammar faculties are a little off. They go underground, and they find this ancient pyramid, which supposedly has the answers to the most ancient questions concerning culture and how humanity came to be. And there's actually a pretty enticing, though very fanficky mythos about how the Predators became the first tangible gods for people way back in the day. They gave them technology, they gave them infrastructure, and they also gave them xenomorphs. Humans voluntarily chose to be the hosts of the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, and once they basically harvested the xenomorphs, of course at the cost of their own lives, if you know those movies, then the Predators would hunt them down for sport. So when these archaeologists go down to the pyramid, they also cross paths with three brother Predators, young blood Predators, who are going down into the Predator as an initiation. They want to get their plasma casters that go over their back, so that way they can prove themselves to their mentors, the Elders, basically. And two of them are killed off very quickly, being Chopper and Celtic or Celtic in that order. They both look pretty cool, but they die really quick. But Scar continues on, and he lives well into the third act of the movie. And through his actions, you see for the first time a Predator, honoring a code. Not just killing people and then blowing themselves up when they lose. He actually uses the concepts of honor to make him so much more enticing than any Predator that we've seen before or since. There's a point where he is almost about to get himself killed by an alien, but then a human character somehow manages to save his life, and he basically they earn each other's respect. So he actually works with who's the last human in the pyramid at this point, and he's the last predator at this point, and he builds tools out of a xenomorph exoskeleton to protect her because it's acid-proof and everything, and they work their way out of the pyramid, and they team up to take down the alien queen, which seems like an impossible feat. And it kind of is, because even though they manage that, Scar loses his life in the process. And that was the first time we saw an honorable death in the Predator franchise as far as the movies are concerned. And this is just grazing the surface of what I want to see from the Predator movies. The reason why I didn't like Prey as much, it is a great movie, don't get me wrong, it's very well done. I love like the cultural aspects that it brings in and everything. The reason why I can't really love it is because it is basically a color by number copy of Predators 1 and 2. You have a warrior of some sort, Predator lands on the Earth, the hero's friends are picked off, they're the last one, and then they find a way to kill the Predator. Or the Predator blows themselves up, right? So for me, it didn't do anything that new story-wise. Even though Alien vs. Predator is not a great movie, at least as far as the Predators are concerned, I think it did a really damn good job. Finally, a Predator who wasn't a total chump, or wasn't just one of those, you know, just before credits, like ancient predators who throws a trophy to the last survivor of the film, then walks back onto their spaceship and disappears, right? And you can only assume how badass they are. You don't actually see them do anything, you just stand there. But Scar Predator, you actually see him be cool, even though that resulted in his death. So, yeah, really great character. More about the story than the way they're presented. I mean, there's more visually appealing predators in him, I'd say. Whether you're talking the original Jungle Hunter or even just the elders that show up at the very tail ends of some of these movies. But, yeah, I actually went into a lot more detail on this particular entry than I thought. So, that being said, let's move into number 9. Instantly a controversial one. This is Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin. I know... Chill for a minute, okay? So, I've talked about Batman and Robin many times throughout this channel. The reason why I love Mr. Freeze so much, I'm going to keep this short. If you want more details, I've done a whole lot of other videos explaining this. Up front, he's very punny, he's very silly, he's wacky, he's ridiculous, and funny, we were just talking about Predator. Here's Arnold Schwarzenegger again, and... the thing about him is, while he has this very comic booky, almost Adam West face value that you take from him, he actually has a really fascinating story, which draws from the comics while also paying homage to Batman's early, like, post-comic code roots, if you get what I mean. And in that respect, this character is done absolutely perfectly. The thing is, you have this man who's like running around doing supervillain stuff that you'd see in cartoons and whatever, just freezing people, and then they're unfrozen, they never really die. I don't think he actually kills anyone throughout this movie, I could be wrong though. But his whole motive is that he needs to firstly collect diamonds to keep his suit powered, but only so he can survive long enough to find a cure for his wife's McGregor syndrome, a fictionalized disease, which isn't really explained at all in the movie, but it's neither here nor there. It could be, like, cancer, just anything. His wife's ill, she's in cryostasis. This man is only walking and talking right now because he wants his wife to be alive. However, he teams up with Poison Ivy, who attempts to kill his wife and pin the death on Batman and the gang, so that way it can turn Mr. Freeze into an absolute monster. Now we have a man who has absolutely nothing to lose, and he just wants to watch a world, I'd say burn, but literally, he wants a world to freeze. And yeah, it's cartoony and all that, but on a character level, that's really interesting to me, and I really love it. I mean, this isn't everyone's preferred presentation of that, obviously, and I'm sure it's been done better elsewhere, but I do love how it's done here. I don't mind the silly aspects of it. But the thing that makes this character so amazing is his arc, where you have who is arguably one of the least loved Batman of all time, a Batman who I do love, George Clooney, and I've explained that in a whole separate video. Where Mr. Freeze, he's finally defeated, he's down, and he said, go on and kill me too, like you did my wife. And Batman does something really interesting, where he knows that Mr. Freeze was a doctor, He's working on a cure for McGregor syndrome, a disease that Alfred also has at this point. And Batman realizes in this moment, let's actually try and save you. Like, throughout all these past 4 movies, Batman's just been killing people, leaving people for dead. But finally he gets to, like, arguably his most dangerous big bad in all these movies. And he's like, let's save you and give you your sense of purpose back so you could do good for other people instead of hurting people. And the way he does this, it's really ingenious. I don't think even Schumacher intended it to be this, but Batman said, "You're still in there, Victor, buried deep within the snow." He uses ice puns to appeal to Mr. Freeze and bring that doctor back out. And we can only assume that Mr. Freeze goes on to continue working on the cure. And he probably beats the snot out of Poison Ivy, but you know what? I think he earned that much, so that's fine. But yeah, he's a really wacky and silly character, but at the same time, very deep and fascinating. I have a bootleg 1/6 scale figure of him up on my shelf. One thing I forgot to mention is, while me compile this list, is just walking around my apartment and looking at the action figures I have. I have an action figure of every single character that's in these top 10. So, that's another interesting note. So, that's it for Mr. Freeze. That takes us into number 8. This is Carl Rupert Cronin from the first Ron Perlman Hellboy movie, directed by Guillermo del Toro. This is the movie I was talking about where, if it wasn't for a particular character, I probably wouldn't be revisiting it very often. Don't get me wrong, Ron Perlman is awesome as Hellboy. One of the best performances of a superhero as far as keeping comic book accuracy is concerned. However, Guillermo del Toro takes great creative license with who's basically just a side character in the comics as far as I know. Again, I'm not a comic guy, I love movies a lot more. But what he does with Cronin is such an overhaul. As far as I know, in the original Hellboy comics, Cronin is simply just a Nazi with a gas mask and a hat. He talks a little bit, he's a scientist, and it pretty much ends there. But Del Toro gives him such an upgrade in this movie. I wish we had him longer. This is my favorite silent killer in film, I'd argue. Excluding characters from like the silent era of film. They still talk with like cards and stuff. No, Cronin doesn't talk at all. His backstory is really interesting, and I think it's explored in like comics and read-ups and stuff like that outside of the film itself, but I've become a receptacle of that knowledge by this point. Basically, he was a choir boy during the days of the Reich, and at a certain point, as he grew up, he started to lose that youthful tone that he used to have. So what he started doing was surgically operating on himself to maintain his youth, and that became this masochistic obsession with replacing everything in his body with Victorian-era clockwork. And by the time we meet him in the movie, it's come to the point where if he gets shot, he's not necessarily bulletproof, but he gets punctured and sand pours out. There is no more blood left in this man. He is totally powered by clockwork. Yeah, that's very fantastical. I don't think you could do that in real life, but that's so cool. And also the way he looks, the fact that he has 2 wrist blades popping out of his hands, and then of course there's a time jump in this movie where eventually he gets those tonfa blades. Yeah, for me, this just boils down to Cronin not necessarily being particularly complex, although outside of this film he does have a very interesting story. But the way that he's presented and the way that he's used, he is so goddamn cool. He's not even the main villain of this film. He's the lapdog to Rasputin, who's the main villain. Cronin's just a henchman, that's it. And he does have personal connection to Hellboy in that he kills his guardian midway through the film. So there is some personal stakes where Cronin does finally face Hellboy, and Hellboy ultimately prevails, and arguably gives Cronin a kind of poetic death. This guy, he has worked his whole life since World War II to achieve immortality, and Hellboy dooms him by giving him that by throwing him in a punji pit and dropping a giant metal cog on top of him. Not only is he trapped by the very device that he uses to make himself immortal, but also, as far as we know, he's stuck under that cog, whirring away, keeping himself alive for all time, and there's no one left who's going to help him out of there. But he's achieved his goal. he could so live forever as long as he keeps his heart wound up. So, yeah, I absolutely love this guy. I've got 4 freaking action figures of this dude. I think he's absolutely amazing. The only time I've ever found, maybe one of 2 instances where I found a Nazi fascinating, I guess honorable mention to the Nazi that we saw in Inglourious Basterds, who's also a really great character and would probably be on an objective top 10 list of greatest movie characters of all time. Hans Landa, that's right. Hans Lanza? I don't remember, but he also amazing character. But as far as fictional Nazis are concerned, Cronin's my favorite. I know that's such a weird thing to say, but again, like I said before, when I reviewed that action figure of Cronin way back in the day on my Player Display channel, there are 3 things I love killing in video games: Nazis, zombies, and zombie Nazis. Cronin is that guy. So I love him. I just think he's really cool. He's an excellent villain, does what he needs to do. Not super complex, but he doesn't need to be. Now we're moving into the top 7. We're actually still staying in the world of comic book movies, but I haven't broken any rules yet. Mr. Freeze is from DC, more specifically the Batman banner. Then we have Cronin, who I believe is from Dark Horse. And then we have another character who is kind of from her own franchise. I don't think she's under a particular well-known banner. This is Hit Girl, or Mindy McCready from Kick-Ass and Kick-Ass 2. Kick-Ass 2 isn't relevant to me at all, though. It's really just Kick-Ass. For those of you who have never heard of this movie, this is the best comic book movie that you've never seen. This is about a group of losers who exist in a world where they are fully aware of superheroes and comic books. They know who Spider-Man is. They know Batman. They know Superman, Wonder Woman, Deadpool. They know who all those characters are. And there's this one loser kid who decides that they want to be a superhero and save the world. Hit Girl's not that kid. She is actually very different. Nobody knows that she exists. Her father, Big Daddy, expertly portrayed by Nicolas Cage, and riffing off of Adam West, funnily enough. He is a guy who was done very dirty by law enforcement and by the mob. That's in this movie. And he is sent to jail, and while he's at jail, his wife passes away, but out of that, their daughter is born. So when he finally leaves jail, he has this insane mission to train his daughter from birth to become an absolute killing machine to get revenge against the mob boss who incriminated him and sent him to jail, which then resulted in his wife's demise. So Hit Girl is a byproduct of his grand master plan. And, well, firstly, she's portrayed by Chloe Moretz, who's like my first childhood crush when I was that age, so that was kind of cool. And I saw this movie during a time when I probably should not have seen it, but this is a character who totally busts the mold of what a superhero is. When you first meet this character, she's just a little kid. You don't know what to expect from her. It's like, oh, cute little girl with some ponytails, just playing around with guns and knives. All right, that's a little bizarre, but whatever. But then there comes a point later on in the movie where she becomes Hit Girl, her persona. She has a purple wig, she's got a domino mask, she's got this crazy bladed staff with her, and she takes out a whole bunch of dudes with guns and knives like it's nothing. She's swearing like a sailor, she's sending blood and limbs all over the walls. This was a very controversial character. I think the censors piped up because this character was so transgressive. You have this 11 or 12-year-old girl saying words that I'd never say on any of my YouTube channels, and she is just spreading crimson absolutely everywhere in all of her scenes. But the great thing about her is the fact that she has an arc. Again, spoiler warning for those of you who haven't seen this movie, but I have to talk about it if I'm to properly discuss why I love this character so much. At a certain point, her father dies. He doesn't make it out. Big Daddy dies in his crusade to defeat this big mob boss, Frank D'Amico. And Hit Girl inevitably has to team up with... It's easy to forget that she's not the main character of this movie. Kick-Ass is the main character of this movie. This loser kid who has no abilities at all, no skills whatsoever, and she inevitably has to team up with him for one final night to get that chance to finally kill Frank. And the rapport between her and Kick-Ass is fascinating because Kick-Ass is saying, like, shouldn't you just go home after all of this? Your father's dead. Everyone else thinks you're dead if they knew that you were alive at all. Why not just run away from all this? And she says, I need to finish what I started. This is my duty. And ultimately, Kick-Ass and Hit Girl, they succeed, and they do destroy Frank. And they have a fucking jetpack, and they fly away. And now, I mean, again, if you disregard Kick-Ass 2, which I don't think is canon, personally, because it's so strange, and it's not accurate to the comics, as far as I know, Hit Girl's free. She is free from not just Frank D'Amico, but also her father's agenda. This big old mob boss at the top of a tower, he's dead. Her father is also deceased. So what's going to be her purpose from now on? Is she going to just become just a normal kid at school, which is implied by the end? But as is also implied, she still has, well, pun intended, hell, why not, these kick-ass skills. She's a lethal fighter. She can protect herself at any given moment. Will she be able to have a normal life? Or is she just not going to be able to help herself, but save the day when the day needs to be saved? And that's an answer that's a question that's answered in the sequel, not very well, but that is tackled later on. But what matters here is Kick-Ass 1. The way that question's kind of left a little open-ended. So she's an excellent character, and that's the thing. Kick-Ass is a movie not about being the hero you want to be. The hero you want to be is Hit Girl. But the hero you are at the end of the day, you're Kick-Ass. You're just a dude with two sticks. And that's what he realizes at the end. And both of them have really excellent character arcs. This movie's borderline perfect. There's very little I'd peel apart from it. There's very little that I'd change. If you want something very different and you don't mind a lot of blood, definitely watch Kick-Ass, especially if you love comic books. This movie is so underrated, very formative for me. Absolutely check it out. Here we are at number 6. This is my only Marvel character on this list. Probably because it's the only Marvel character that I really seriously care about. But he was portrayed by multiple people throughout the decades. This is Spider-Man, specifically from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is Andrew Garfield's portrayal. Now, I know, I grew up with Tobey Maguire like everyone else. I love and adore Tobey Maguire. In all 3 movies, and I guess in No Way Home as well, he was excellent. Even in Spider-Man 3, which is usually regarded as an imperfect movie, I think what he was asked to do, he did extremely well. And I would never take anything away from how great Maguire was at being just that classic Spider-Man. Perhaps not totally comic accurate, being that he was like a 30-year-old playing a teenager, but it still worked very, very well. But then something interesting happened after Spider-Man 3. A movie called The Amazing Spider-Man released, led by this guy I've never seen before at that point in time, named Andrew Garfield. I thought the movie was fun. I thought it was enjoyable, and I still feel that way today, but that movie didn't necessarily stick with me. Same thing could be said about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. First time I watched it, I was like, hey, that was really fun. I enjoyed it. And that was kind of it. But then for some reason, I got to college, and for whatever reason, I just had this hyper-fixation on Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, specifically as he was portrayed in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. Like Spider-Man 3, it was kind of corrupted by studio interference, but this time tenfold. This is a very flawed movie, but it does have some really great strengths. Again, if you strip away all the side characters, all the side stories and all that, the story of Spider-Man in this movie is very, very good. I know for a lot of people, this is their least favorite Spider-Man, and I totally understand why. This is a Spider-Man who is very arrogant, who's very impulsive, who's very naive. And for that reason, his Peter Parker and his Spider-Man aren't that different. Peter Parker's pretty cool. Like, he's skateboarding around and stuff. He's throwing basketballs. He's a cool guy doing cool things, and it's not conventional. And I totally understand that. This is not the typical Spider-Man, which is good, because this is a rebooted franchise. Of course you want to do something different. You don't want to keep doing the same story every time. You need to change the mold somehow. So I'm fine with that. The movies aren't perfect, but the story that this arrogant version of Spider-Man has, I think, is great. The thing about Amazing Spider-Man 2 that's so good, amongst several other things, I could do a deep dive into this movie one day if you want to, like I did a la Batman and Robin, is, of course, you have Gwen Stacy. And you have this lingering promise from the now deceased father of Gwen Stacy. His dying words to Spider-Man was, leave Gwen out of this. You dealt with the Lizard, you're going to make enemies later on. Gwen's just going to be in more trouble. But Peter Parker is naive enough to believe at a certain point in Amazing Spider-Man 2 that maybe I can do both. Maybe I'm powerful enough to do both. I can be the hero that the world needs me to be. But I can also just be a guy who loves an awesome, pretty, and smart girl. Why can't I do both of those things? But unfortunately, Gwen is just as heroic as Peter is. She gets herself involved. She helps him fight and defeat Electro. But it can't account for Green Goblin. And we know how this movie ends. Gwen dies. And Peter Parker's world is totally destroyed. They could have paced this out better. He could have used a third movie. I still hope that one day they do it. It's not too late. But they could, but eventually, you see that time passes. Seasons pass. And this version of Spider-Man is just visiting the grave of Gwen, knowing that she could still be alive if he just let her go to Oxford, go to England, not New England, that's where I live. And this is all his fault. This is completely on him. But then, through the help, again, this could have been done better, through the help of hearing Gwen's graduation speech that was recorded on his computer, and also some words of wisdom from Aunt May, a very underrated portrayal of Aunt May, I'd say, from Sally Field, he realizes, at a point, you gotta take the past, you gotta put it behind you, and then you gotta keep moving forward, hold on to hope, and do the thing that you're meant to do. Now that Gwen's gone, it sucks, but Spider-Man still has a job to do. And then this leads into one of the most controversial endings in cinematic history, where a very ridiculous and insane portrayal of the Rhino shows up, a la Paul Giamatti. And then Spider-Man hops back in, he's ready to do the good guy thing again, swings the manhole towards the Rhino's horn, cut to black, end of film. Now, I get it. I too want to see where this fight ends. I too felt very duped in the theater. I totally understand that. But at the same time, this ending does kind of work in a weird way, because after learning what we've learned, after getting those words of wisdom from both Gwen, Aunt May, and arguably Uncle Ben as well, we know that no matter how this fight ends, hopefully, Peter Parker, he's going to be okay. He's going to figure out, he's going to continue being the hero he needs to be, and he's learned the required lessons to become the Spider-Man that we need from him. Because he starts off arrogant. By the end of this movie, he's a lot more humbled. That's why I so desperately wanted an Amazing Spider-Man 3. It could continue immediately from Amazing Spider-Man 2. Finish that Rhino fight. You don't need young Andrew Garfield. You don't even need Paul Giamatti. You just need a flashback of Spider-Man finishing that fight, probably winning. And then if you account for how he spoke about himself in No Way Home, this movie takes place in between the events of TASM 2, as I call it, and No Way Home, where Spider-Man, he's still kind of down in the dumps. He's still trying to deal with his grief. In No Way Home, this Spider-Man, Peter 3, as he's called at that point, he says he got rageful. I want to see that chapter about this man just trying to cope with himself, knowing what the right thing is to do, knowing that he should leave the past behind, but he just can't, and it hinders him greatly. And that is such a level of emotional depth that I don't think we see enough in most comic book stories. And I really want to see that explored in an Amazing Spider-Man 3 one day. So, and Andrew Garfield's one of my favorite actors of all time. I should also give an honorable mention to what he did in Tick Tick Boom with Jonathan Larson, but I excluded that character because he was a real guy, so it would feel weird to put him on this list. But yeah, this specific Spider-Man, he does something so unique. I mean, Tobey Maguire is the classic golden boy Spider-Man, but Andrew, he does something vastly unique. I wouldn't necessarily call it an upgrade. It's just a totally different interpretation that I think upgrades the general mythos of Spider-Man. I mean, yeah, it pulls elements from the comics, with like the death of Gwen Stacy, which is such a big deal to this character, but the fact that we get to see it play out, and the fact that we see an arrogant Spider-Man without a symbiote, I think that's really useful and very interesting, and it makes him a lot more human. This is a superhero who makes dire mistakes, and he suffers for it. So yeah, I'm firm. If not at my number 6, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is definitely on my top 10, no matter which way you twist it. Took a quick water break, and now we are moving on to number 5, and finally we are leaving the world of comics, but we will come back. But for now, we are actually stepping into the realm of horror. This is Jack Griffin, aka the Invisible Man, from Invisible Man, expertly portrayed by Claude Rains, one of the best actors I've ever seen in a damn movie. For those of you who haven't seen this movie, you need to see this movie. I know that some of the Universal monsters, black and white era, they're kind of ignored, forgotten about, because people are more interested in elevated horror, perhaps they prefer slashers. For me, I really love the black and white era. I love the silent films. I love the Universal monsters. That's my cup of tea when it comes to horror. Slashers, it's fun, but when it comes to like the original stuff and the really rich storytelling, I think it's a perfect balance for me. And as for the Universal monsters, the Invisible Man is my absolute favorite. This movie is very short, but it does a lot with its time. Now, this is a classic trademark story of science gone wrong. You have a man who's experimenting with science, and he finds a way to turn himself invisible. And this, unfortunately, the side effect is madness. He goes crazy, he goes on a killing spree, and he's just an overall nuisance to anyone he's around. And that's fun at face value. But one of the things that makes this character so great is the fact that he is so sympathetic, and he has a motive for why he made himself invisible to begin with. This all boils down to a single word: Flora, as portrayed by Gloria Stewart, aka Old Rose from Titanic. The reason why the Invisible Man is invisible is because he wanted to create a formula that he could sell to armies, bigwigs, guys in suits, so that way he could amass a huge fortune just to support his wife. That's it. That's his only motive going into all of this. But unfortunately, he becomes a recluse, he goes mad, and everything just is outside of his control. And then you have Claude Rains. He has this seriously commanding performance. Every time you see him, or don't see him, you can't help but stay totally transfixed to the screen. Whether he's going totally bonkers because of the monocaine in his brain, or just laughing up a storm, cackling like a bastard, running around, tipping over a baby in a carriage, I shit you not, just causing the village loads of issues, and destroying the whole freaking train with everyone on it. And then on the other side of the coin, when he finally is with Flora, suddenly you see that Jack Griffin come back. You see this really sincere and decent man. Forget science, he's just a guy, just a husband, and he wants to do whatever he can to support his wife. He just lost his way, he got ahead of himself, he was naive, and the monocaine took over. And ultimately that resulted in his death. He gets shot dead by the end of the film. And very awesomely, in the final moments, you see the side effect of the monocaine wear off, and you actually see Claude Rains' face in the final scene of the film, which is really cool. So that's why I think this character is so great in a nutshell. I mean, it's pretty simple to say why. Also, I think it's just a very well-directed film for its time. I mean, it's very obviously very stage play-like, but the performances are really good. I love the set pieces, I love the environments, all the various looks of the Invisible Man, because how he tries concealing himself, the different wraps he wears, down to the glasses, I absolutely love. His style is really cool. I really do adore this movie. But it's also worth mentioning why I also really, really dislike the recent remake of the Invisible Man that we got. The reason why I hate the remake is because it absolutely undoes everything that made the original Invisible Man so great. In the new Invisible Man, which I think I've only seen once, I wouldn't dare or bother watching it again, is instead of Invisible Man being this guy who's just trying to support his wife and trying to do the right thing despite all the evil that he's done, this new Invisible Man with this really stupid looking, like, suit with a whole bunch of little cameras on it. It looks ridiculous. He's like a horrible, rancid misogynist, and this movie tries pushing this agenda forward of how, like, women are oppressed by men and stuff like that. I mean, that's why I said I don't like elevated horror, the modern movies that they do these days that have some sort of deep, intrinsic message to them. They really just annoy me when they bring things to the forefront. Invisible Man is a high culprit of that. Particularly because it undoes one of the big things it undoes one of the big things that made the original 1933 film so good. The fact that the Invisible Man had good intentions despite being a bad guy. It wasn't his fault. He drove himself crazy in the pursuit of doing something good for his wife and perhaps for the world as well. But the remake totally ruins his character, spits on the legacy. I get it, it's a remake, you want to try something new. I'm being a little hypocritical since we just talked about Spider-Man. I said, you should change up the mold a little bit. But the fact that it goes so far off and just totally reverses what we expect from this character, I'm not able to enjoy the movie. Granted, it's good. It's got really excellent scenes, really good performances, but it's not fun. It's not interesting. It's not a story that we haven't seen already. I prefer horror movies which are just wacky, kooky, mad science, have fun, have a good narrative, have strong archetypes, and keep it that simple. You don't need to give me this whole, like, riot act on anything on why a minority is oppressed or anything like that, or why certain people are misunderstood. I don't need it to get that in your face. I really don't like those types of horror movies. That being said, if you do enjoy those types of films, that's alright. That's just how I feel. But I really just love the classics that aren't trying to do anything. This just wanted to be a good story, and that's all I need. And Jack Griffin, without Claude Rains, this movie wouldn't have worked nearly as well. Especially because he was selected because of his vocals, because he was a stage actor. And until the very end of the film, you never see this dude's face. This entire performance is carried by volume, by vocal control, and physical movements. This entire film falls back on Claude Rains. And granted, there are other really big characters and actors in here. Like, even have the Angel Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life. He's in there too, and he does a good job too. You got Kemp, you have Flora, of course, and Una O'Connor, who's like the original Scream Queen of horror, as far as I know, and she's wildly good in this film, and she shows up in Bride of Frankenstein as well. A fun little fact. So, yeah, really great movie. If you haven't seen it, my God, please see it. It's so short, very easy to find. Please check it out. It's so worth it. Off to number 4 we go, still staying in the realm of horror, but again, not breaking our rules. Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man, is under the Universal Monsters banner. However, Count Orlok of Nosferatu 1922 fame is not. He was produced by the now long defunct Prana Film. This movie has gone on in infamy as one of the most well-known bootlegs ever made. This is, of course, loosely based off of Bram Stoker's Dracula, one of the most influential books of recent memory, I think. And, of course, his studio, at least his film run by F.W. Murnau, he's like, I want to make a movie about this Dracula character. And the interesting thing that he did is it's chronicled that he's an occultist. I don't remember the full details of that. But he used imagery and symbols to inform the direction and aesthetic of his film. A film from the silent era, which still holds up. And from this movie, we get Max Schreck. The word Shrek literally meaning terror, so yeah, if you're a Shrek fan, that's where that word comes from. You have Max Schreck portraying Count Orlok. Obviously, he can't audibly say a single word of dialogue, so you have text cards. So Well, kind of similar to Claude Rains, this is an actor who had a lot of restrictions working against him. Whereas you can't see Jack Griffin, you can't hear Max Shrek or Count Orlok at all. It all boils down to movements, prosthetics, and how sparingly he's shown or not shown in the movie. The interesting thing about Nosferatu or Count Orlok, he's called both. Nosferatu is more the species, Count Orlok is more his, I don't know, his human name, whatever you want to call it, is the fact that we don't see him a lot, right? We're more focused on Hutter or whatever the character's called, again, in this bootleg universe interpretation of Dracula. It's more focused on the main human characters. But when the vampire does show up, it's not always just, hey, here's Max Shrek in makeup, right? Instead, they use lighting, shadows, suspense, darkness. That's the thing. It's not just Max Shrek. It's a way that this movie is orchestrated. I mean, it's literally called a Symphony of Terror for a reason. The way that this film is directed makes you constantly feel the presence of Nosferatu when he's not even there. Even though this is a silent film, devoid of color and audio, aside from music, of course, depending on which version you watch, you always feel like Nosferatu is over your shoulder. He feels like a plague over this city. Something that Bela Lugosi never accomplished. Bela Lugosi is, of course, a great character, definitely one of the best performances I've ever seen, but I couldn't say that he's in a great movie. That movie had a lot working against it. But then you have this movie from the silent era that Bram Stoker's wife tried to destroy and claim royalties from. I think this movie is superior to Bela Lugosi, Todd Browning's Dracula in almost every way. I think the pacing's better. I think the directing's better. Performances, I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, you got a talkie versus a silent movie, so I don't know if you could necessarily pick one or the other. That would boil down to preferences. But in terms of just the way that the movie is structured, it makes this character larger than life. He doesn't even need to be there. But that being said, even when he is there, he is diabolically creepy and weird and gross. The fact that they subbed out the trademark vampire bat for rats, I think, changes everything. Makes this character so much more weird and bizarre. Like, that's why I don't even call him Dracula. He's Nosferatu, he's his own thing. And granted, Nosferatu, the term, was coined before Bram Stoker's Dracula was ever penned. But this is the piece of media that cemented that word into lexicon because of this performance. And then you have Max Shrek with, like, that long nose, those creepy elvish ears, that bulbous head, that iconic robe and everything. And then when you no longer see him in physical form, he has that shadow going up the stairs and all of that. You see him creeping over that bed. Every moment with him is so scary, including every moment without him. He just takes in every scene, and he doesn't even need to be there. So this character is sincerely great. I think by a landslide. Could I say landslide? Because I love Jack Griffin too. You know what? I will say by some margin, Nosferatu is my favorite horror character in film. Just on the fact that silent film has so much working against it, since we have so many new standards now, but the film still works. That's really a testament to how great the directing was, and how excellent Max Shrek was whenever he was on screen. So he's earned my number 4 spot, absolutely. Here we are in the top 3. If anyone says any crap about any of these 3 characters, these are the ones where I'm like, I can't. Like, I love these characters too much. I can't move them. They're locked. There's no negotiations here. Taking the bronze, but still, I think, one of the greatest performances ever. This is a character that we're probably all thinking a lot about, since we're going to be seeing another one of these movies in the coming weeks, forget months. We have Superman, as portrayed by Christopher Reeve, from Superman 1978, specifically. I'm not as interested in the sequels, not even Superman 2, because there's 2 different cuts of the movie, which just make it really confusing, and neither are perfect. And then 3 or 4, No. But that first movie was such a holistic experience, and that's what really did put, like, comic book movies on the map for the first time. I mean, yeah, you had other attempts in the past, like Adam West's Batman, but this is the one that was like a really big budget. I think the biggest budget of any movie at the time, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the one that said, yeah, a dude running around with a cape, or flying around with a cape no less, that could be a thing in film. And this worked. Everything about this movie is excellent. I mean, you got the score, the story, the actors, but of course, the golden boy being Christopher Reeve. This is, in my opinion, this is the definitive comic to movie performance that we've ever gotten. No one's done it better. I don't believe a single actor has ever been better a choice for a comic character than Christopher Reeve as Superman. As much as I love Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, he's such a radically different interpretation. As much as I love Michael Keaton's Batman, he still leaves a lot to be desired. Not Keaton's fault, it's just that you don't get enough story in there. But for Superman, you get the look, you get the performance, and you get the story. Triple threat. And you get the music on top of that, you get the direction, everything about this movie is absolutely incredible. I mean, granted, there are certain things that haven't aged particularly well, like perhaps some visual effects, when he infamously reverses time. Even that I can excuse, because it's an early comic book movie. They could do really wacky stuff, that's fine. But in terms, as far as Christopher Reeve is concerned, you know, everyone says life imitates art. Art imitates life, because of how perfect Reeve was for this character. He had the chiseled jaw, he had the hair, he had the voice, he had the eyes. He looked exactly as how we picture Superman to be. He defined what future artistic representations of this character would be. He became the standard. I mean, granted, honorable mention to George Reeves, who I wish I had grown up with a little bit more. Like, he also set a standard as well. But even then, I don't know if he was the complete holistic version that we were waiting for. Not his fault at all, of course, but in terms of just that iconic profile, that silhouette of the character, Reeve was a perfect match. And you can't talk about Superman without talking about his Clark Kent, and that's what really sets him apart from any performances before and since. Talk about night and day. You have Superman, just this really strong, charismatic, defiant, and brave symbol. And then you have Clark Kent, this bumbling little moron from the Daily Planet, stuttering, tripping over himself, couldn't hurt a fly, but he can catch a bullet, even if you don't notice. He put such effort into creating that distinction between his alter ego and his real identity, being Superman. Superman is who he is, not Clark Kent. He is Superman. That's what makes this character so unique from all the other superheroes we've been talking about here. It's usually a human who tries being a superhero. Here we have a superhero who wishes they could be a human. And he sells both halves of that story so well. Better than anybody else. Better than Tobey Maguire. Better than Michael Keaton. I don't think anyone beats him. It's so distinct. And even in the later installments, which aren't nearly as good, I mean, Superman 2 is a good movie, no matter which cut you're working with. Both cuts have strengths and weaknesses, but both are watchable. But even including Superman 3 and 4, Reeve is great. He still acts wonderfully. He at least is able to work with what he has. I haven't watched Superman 4 for obvious reasons. I just never got around to it. If it ever popped up, I'd watch it just to see what the hubbub is all about. But even in Superman 3, which I have seen, a movie which I definitely don't like, he still does something interesting where again, it's pretty ridiculous, but you have that fight scene in the junkyard between Clark Kent and that evil, disheveled version of Superman. That's a whole other side of the character that represents this man's like that possibility that he could just take over the world if he wanted to. He does have the power to be the bad guy like on a dime if he ever so chose. It would be so simple. And we have that brief window to see what Superman would be if he was bad. So I found that single moment in an otherwise really bad movie really interesting, and just a bigger exploration of this character. Not just the fact that he is genuinely good, and he's a guy who's trying to be human, who's trying to balance superhero life with personal life, with Lois Lane, special mention to Margot Kidder, who was also great in this movie. But also, he's this guy who probably is demanding and could be selfish in a different world, who could demand more and could take it in a minute, like as Zod did in Superman 2. No problem. This is a dude who can reverse time. It would be so easy to get whatever he wanted. But he is the moral standard for what a perfect, uncompromised good guy would be. And that's okay to have in movies. A lot of people, unfortunately, discredit this movie because they say, oh, it's too cheesy, he's too good, he's not complex enough. And you know what? He doesn't need to be. It's okay to have a hero who is just a good hero, and is really damn good at being good. That's enough. You don't always have to have multifaceted characters. Granted, it is always good to see them, but that doesn't always have to happen. Whether it's a blessing or a curse, we now live in a world where we have characters who are a lot more complicated, who are a lot more three-dimensional. Not to say that Christopher Reeve's Superman wasn't three-dimensional. He certainly was. Like when Lois Lane died for a brief moment in time, and he brought her back to life with, time shenanigans. But now we have such different expectations for what any comic book character is supposed to be. We need to know about their backstory. We need to know about who they care about. We need to know about their dark side and all of that. We need to know about how they balance it out. But here is just a story about a good guy doing good things. And there is nothing wrong with that. And he set such a standard. Whether people prefer that standard or they've done everything in their power to do something better than that standard, he's a pillar of what cinema can do, just this character. And the movie itself. The movie itself is also amazing. So yeah, and last footnote, I mentioned it before, Superman also came into my life at a very important time. I did see the movie before this happened, but my dad showed me this movie the day that I was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. So I rewatched this movie with him that day, and it gave me just a little bit of hope. Just a little bit of hope to keep going. And yeah, this movie, it's not even favoritism. Objectively, this character is great. He's tops. But on a personal level even, he is so important to me. And I've never seen a better portrayal of a comic book character in film. Really, no one beats Christopher Reeve's Superman, as far as comic books go. He is basically perfect. Who takes the silver and the number 2 spot? That would be Caesar. Specifically, Roddy McDowell Caesar from the original Planet of the Apes saga, being 5 movies. Of course, most people nowadays are accustomed with Andy Serkis's Caesar from the remake movies, the first 3 anyways. He had his own trilogy, and then there was a spin-off movie being Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Those movies are fine. There's nothing bad about them necessarily, but they just don't line up with my tastes. For me, the story's not nearly as interesting or wacky or fantastical as the original 5 are. I did a video on the movies recently discussing the endings of the original 5 movies and how I'd rank them, and I also did a podcast ranking all of the Apes movies on my Player Display channel. So if you want to check either of those 2 videos out, they're available. But going back to Caesar here, this is a really interesting character for me because I know I love him, but I can't necessarily say that either of the 2 movies that he's in, being Conquest or Battle, are my top 10 favorite movies of all time. It's more the idea and the performance of Caesar that works for me. Again, no character on this list is necessarily defined by the movie that they're in. In the case of Caesar, it really boils down to the character himself. and the performance by Roddy McDowall, who's one of my favorite actors ever. So for those of you who aren't too familiar with the original Apes movies, before I go any further, I love these movies so much. I implore you, please watch them before I go on. They're all free on YouTube right now as of recording this, so they're very accessible. But what makes Caesar so interesting is I think he has the most fascinating and revolutionary origin story of any fictional character that I've ever seen. This is a non-linear timeline. Again, here we go into spoiler territory. So in Planet of the Apes 68, and beneath the Planet of the Apes, we are in a future version of Earth, where humans have obliterated themselves in nuclear war. The few who remain are mute, they're cattle, they're basically animals, and the apex predators now are apes who have evolved or are more humanoid. And then you have Taylor, and at the very end of Beneath, he detonates a nuke which explodes this world. However, there are 3 survivors, being Zira, Cornelius, and Milo. You don't need to worry about Milo. Zira and Cornelius, they go back in time of this Earth and escape from the Planet of the Apes. And everyone learns that these apes are from a future in which humans destroy themselves, and that terrifies them. So unfortunately, Zira and Cornelius are killed. However, they manage to save their son, Milo, who is named after the third ape who joined them on their trip to the past but died in the opening of the film. But this ape goes on to rename himself Caesar. Again, this is the case of the character and the actor being better than the movies he's contained in. And we don't get him enough. He's really only in 2 of the 5 movies in this franchise. Again, excluding the Burton one and the 4 of the reboot franchise. What makes Caesar so great is kind of for similar reasons as to why I love Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man so much. He is also not an ideal hero. He's very imperfect, very immature, impatient, and naive, you could also argue. The thing about this particular Caesar is he knows what he's supposed to be. He knows what his very existence represents. The fact that he's alive means that human beings will one day become the lesser species. What's he going to do with that information? Throughout Conquest, he sees apekind basically being slaves. Well, they're slaves. That's what this film is. They're being carted around, they're forced into labor camps, they're being trained, they're told no, and they're beaten, horrible cruelty, they're electrocuted and stuff, and Caesar sees all this going down, and this whole time, he's loaded with the knowledge that he is the ape of lore that can save his entire race, and he manages to pull that off. And by the end of the film, of course, it's just him and one human friend, McDonald, and that one, bad human guy who no one really cares about. He's not as important. Again, one of the weak points of this movie. But yeah, they're all there. All the apes are cheering. They have their guns and everything. And Caesar's there on top of, almost his platform at the top of some stairs. And he delivers this monologue, which basically tells you everything you need to know about this character. He says that my people will conspire and plot and plan until human beings are a memory. And it's one of the strongest monologues that I've ever heard in film. But as I discussed in one of my most recent videos, well, my most recent video, it's only days old now, there are 2 different cuts of this monologue. In the longer version of this monologue is one that we see theatrically. It's a canon one, which then goes on to inform the sequel, being Battle. This is the ending I prefer. So Caesar says, we are going to take over. That day is upon you now. He is dead certain. He wants to do this. But then one of the apes, being his future wife, Lisa, says no. And Caesar's able to kind of come back to his senses, and he says, but for the moment, we're going to relish in this victory. However, we are going to dominate humanity with compassion and understanding. Again, this is an area where the idea is greater than the film itself, because the film had to be radically recut. Roddy McDowall had to record new lines for this new ending, so it's noticeably choppy towards the end of the movie. But the spirit is so there. In this movie, and in battle, Caesar never fully realizes this. He never fully comes to that epiphany of creating the perfect balance between ape and humans. And that's the whole point of this series. Neither human nor man can determine the future. And neither human nor ape can determine the future. And at the same time, can neither of them control it or be better than themselves. Caesar, this ape, who went by many names throughout the history of these movies, all the humans and all the apes are expecting he's going to be the one. He's going to be the hero. But we see in the movies the reality of who this dude is, and he's not. He is very immature. He's very held back by his own beliefs and his biases and his prejudices. And you can argue he's racist, because since he's a child, he believes that most humans except Armando and McDonald are inherently dangerous, flawed, and self-destructive. He has serious prejudice problems, and they still exist by the end of the final film. And I think that's important. I know a lot of people criticize these movies because Caesar does not get that arc. I think these movies benefit from that fact. In real life, heroes don't always get to that arc. They don't always embody what we see them as in this game of telephone that plays out throughout history, where we retell the story of these ancient heroes and characters and stuff, whether they be fiction or historical, and how they've informed our future. But at the same time, we never really knew these people. They died so far off in the past, right? And we only read about them in textbooks, see them in documentaries, but we don't know their flaws. We don't know that they were perfect. We've idealized them, right? Caesar was idealized. Not only that, but history was misinterpreted. In Escape, when Zira and Cornelius are still alive, they recount the beginning of ape kind as when an ape named Aldo said no. This is wrong. This is, again, that broken game of telephone. Firstly, Caesar isn't the ape that said no. Lisa said no. Second, Aldo was the name of one of Caesar's greatest enemies being in battle, and he was a buffoon. He was no hero. He was a total idiot. Throughout history, it got muddled. It got muddied. And not even ape kind was able to properly archive their history. And that's probably why, as Cornelius had suggested from the first movie, that the content of the scrolls would not be worth the same value as their parchment. History gets messed up over time and gets misinterpreted. And then it just falls down into myth, and we follow it dogmatically without ever questioning it. That's why the character of the original Caesar is so great. I'd argue one of the most underrated characters in all of not just fiction, not just movies, but in all of storytelling. This includes religion. This includes faith and folklore. This character needs to be studied more. I think he is severely underplayed, not spoken about enough. And part of that is because Andy Serkis is here now. And granted, everything he does is great. He's awesome. I would never discredit him in any way. But Roddy McDowall's performance and the story of Caesar, the incomplete story of the original Caesar, is so vital to storytelling. And people need to talk about it more. Now here we are at number 1. As much as I do love Caesar, and I probably would put him at number 1, I have to go with a character who has informed me throughout my life as a cinemaphile. Unfortunately, it's a really boring entry. It's Darth Vader from the Star Wars saga. More specifically, the original trilogy. New Hope, which I just call Star Wars, then Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. I'm not going to go into him nearly as much as I did Caesar, because I devoted an entire video to Darth Vader in the earlier days of this particular channel, if you want to check that out. The reason why Darth Vader is so interesting, not just because he's cool, he's a badass, he kills people, he's scary, he has perhaps the most iconic silhouette in all of cinema, but also the fact that he's informed by classical myth but he's a counter-argument to that myth. Again, I've explained this in a whole separate video, so I'll be brief here. But basically, it's this traditional, age-old story, Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, where basically it's this idea of a hero who's surrounded by all these traditional cliche archetypes, who leaves their home, becomes a hero they need to be, then they go back home, and then happily ever after and all of that. So Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker rather, he was meant to be that traditional hero. He's just this guy on a distant planet, this little boy. He's taken in by the Jedi. Everyone says, you're the chosen one. You're going to protect the world from the galaxy from darkness. You are going to help us defeat the dark side of the Force and the Sith. But instead, because this particular hero has a weakness, being his attachments to his mother and his wife, he falls. And he becomes Darth Vader. Darth Vader is not just a character, he's a counter-argument. This hero that has been interpreted so many times throughout religion, movies, storytelling, comic books, all of that. This is a counter-argument to that same character we've been seeing done again and again and again throughout history. And it poses a simple question: what if this hero failed? What if something went wrong? And Darth Vader is the embodiment of that failure. I'm less interested in Anakin, because Anakin is just that hero, right? What's more important is what happens after he fails. What does he become? And he becomes, well, the evil that everyone wanted him to destroy, as Obi-Wan pretty much said. And then you see Vader, like, armed from the knowledge of the prequels, whether you prefer the prequels or not. For me, like, up and down, I'm not really sure to this day. But Darth Vader is no longer that hero anymore. He is just this shell. He's a pawn. He's not even the main villain of any of the Star Wars movies, really. Well, maybe you could argue the first Star Wars movie, but after that, he's no longer the main villain. Knowing what we know now in hindsight, he's not the big bad. The big bad is Palpatine, and Darth Vader is just his hitman, effectively. And Darth Vader is sent around to kill people. He's directed to blow up planets, but he takes no pleasure in this. He hates himself. He despises himself. He knows that he is what he is because he lost control, because he holds himself responsible partly for his mother's death, and he holds himself responsible for his own wife's death. 2 lives that he was intent on saving. He wanted to save his mother from slavery. She was killed by Tusken Raiders. He had nightmares rather, of his wife perishing in childbirth, and he is partly responsible for her death. Again, it's weird how she died of sadness. That's how it canonically goes. I think she died of a broken heart, personally. Or maybe like constrictions in the throat because she was force choked. I don't know. It's neither here nor there. Ultimately, she dies. Again, the prequels are a little odd. But what matters here is what Darth Vader is within this moment in the grand timeline in the original trilogy. He is driven by hatred and spite alone, not necessarily towards anyone in particular who is currently around. Most of the people who he knew are dead at this point. He just despises himself. That's the whole point of it. But then New Hope comes along, and again, if I weren't making every entry on this list so exclusive to their franchise, then he'd probably be on this list as well. We have Luke Skywalker, his son. And we could also argue his daughter, Leia. She also plays a minor role. I actually wish she played a greater role in the original movies, especially in Return of the Jedi. But Luke, he becomes the traditional hero's journey. Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces. And he redeems Anakin Skywalker. And Vader uses his last moment alive to save his son and destroy the Emperor. Headcanon, Palpatine dies here, right? Sequels don't happen, right? So ignore that. But in that last moment, Vader learns from his son that it's never too late to do the right thing. He saves his son, he destroys the Emperor, who is responsible for ruining and destroying so many lives and planets. And he has a last moment with his son where his moment's removed, and he says, "Tell your sister you were right about me." And he dies. And this is another interesting thing, which I highlighted in the Darth Vader video, which again you can check out later. But Darth Vader didn't necessarily die because of Palpatine's lightning. Rather, it was something much more interesting. The way the dark side functions is the people who use it, namely Sith, or anyone who just taps into the dark side of the Force, really, they prosper off harvesting their suffering, their hatred, and their anger. At this point, throughout the original trilogy, you can argue Anakin Skywalker is basically dead. His hatred, his anger, his self-loathing is the only thing that's keeping him upright. So when he finally turns against the Emperor and chooses to have a moment with his boy, all that hatred is pulled away. And it's not strong enough to keep him alive. There's just that little glimmer of light side left in him that keeps him alive just long enough to have those final words with his son. But otherwise, throughout the trilogy, he is just a puppet to his anger, to the dark side of the Force, and what it can do to people. And this is a real thing, too. You know, there are certain points in our lives where we just absolutely despise ourselves. We lose sight of the things that we love. We lose sight of the things that we make important. We lose sight of the fact that we make other people's lives important. Did I just repeat myself? I don't know, but you get what I mean. We become blind. We get stuck in this cycle of self-hatred, and we can't see ourselves anymore. We lose ourselves. And that's what Vader represents, of course, on a much more dramatic and operatic level. Very Shakespearean, too. But this is a much more literal and fantastical version of that human story. I mean, we don't die when we suddenly choose to do the right thing, necessarily, but this metaphorical way of putting it is so profound and interesting. It's one of my favorite endings in film. I mean, Return of the Jedi isn't even one of my top 10 films of all time, but it's one of the best endings for a character, for a film, let alone a trilogy. So it's very... Darth Vader is very important. He is like the first character to really inform me of how a character in general is done right in any media. So that's as far as I'll go. If you want more details on Vader, I did a whole video on that, but it's pretty much just what I iterated here. But if you want, it's there. So yeah, that is my list. Again, very subjective, all me. I didn't like want to go like what other people do, what other characters do other people like. I didn't want to do that at all. I wanted to go just strictly based on who do I like. And this is my honest list. And again, give it a year. It could change. It could shift. There could be new characters on here. And our characters could get kicked out. But as of this moment, I think this is accurate. So, yeah, this is technically the end of this podcast, I'd be tempted to call it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening along, maybe learned a few things. If you haven't watched any of these movies, I encourage you to check them out. I think they're all very good films. I mean, perhaps the most contended ones are Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Batman and Robin. They all have very strong elements to them. Like, Batman and Robin is one of the most reviled movies in history, but I objectively really love it, unironically. I think it has some really great stuff in it. I did a whole podcast on it on my Player Display channel if you want that. And The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I've never talked about that in depth, but I love that movie a lot as well. But I love all these movies, and I love all these characters a lot for very different reasons. So, that being said, that's what I got. So, let me know in the comments who some of your favorite characters are. It doesn't have to be 10, it could just be 3, or even just 1. Hell, why not? Some of your least favorite characters, too. But, yeah, more importantly, like, a favorite character of yours who you probably wouldn't expect to see on other people's lists. Like, I think the most outlandish one here would be Hit Girl. She's a great character, but not very well known. She's not like a household name, but she's basically perfect, in my opinion. A perfect character. And our characters are here just because I love the idea of them a lot, like Cronin, for example. Not a key essential character, but I love his backstory a lot. And Caesar definitely does something wholly unique. But at the end of the day, Vader needs to be on the top, just because he informed... He's the baseline for me. All characters I learned about after the fact are judged against him. So that's just how it goes. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching or for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. And I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I will do something again in the future. But until we know what that is, have a good day and stay frosty.